Hello, my name is Tom Wilkinson and welcome back to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. In recent weeks, the United Nations Security Council has met to discuss Israel's planned military expansion in Gaza, to reject the creation of a rival government in Sudan, and to hear reports of conflicts in Yemen, Syria, and at the Thailand-Cambodia border. The Security Council is a powerful yet controversial organisation at the centre of the United Nations. They have an immense amount of power, but this power is concentrated in the hands of just 5 countries. Today I want to think about 2 questions. What exactly is the UN Security Council, and why does it have so much influence over international peace and security? We're going to look at the history of the Security Council, how it works, and the difference between permanent and temporary members. We'll talk about its goals and powers, examine some of the criticisms it faces, and think about what the future might hold for one of the most powerful organisations in the world. If you like listening to Thinking in English, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. I release bonus episodes every Friday. You can listen to this episode with absolutely no adverts on it, both audio and video. And I also hold conversation clubs 6 times a week. Here is today's vocabulary list. Resolution. Resolution. A formal decision or statement made by an organisation or a group. As in, the UN passed a resolution to provide aid for the flood victims. Intervention. Intervention. The act of getting involved in a situation to change what happens. For example, the UN called for international intervention to stop the conflict. Permanent. Permanent. Lasting for a long time or forever. As in, she has a permanent job at the university. Veto. Veto. The power to reject or block a decision or proposal. For example, the country used its veto to stop the new law from being approved. Security. Security. The state of being safe or protected from danger. As in, the airport has tight security at all times. Representation. Representation. The act of speaking or acting on behalf of others. For example, the lawyer provided legal representation for her client. The United Nations Security Council, often just called the Security Council, is one of the most important parts of the United Nations. While the UN has many different bodies and organisations, the Security Council is the one responsible for keeping international peace and security. Its main responsibilities include trying to prevent wars and violent conflicts between countries, authorising military action if it believes it is necessary to protect peace, imposing sanctions, punishments like trade restrictions on countries that break international rules, and approving or organising peacekeeping missions, where UN soldiers are sent to conflict areas to protect civilians or help maintain order. The Security Council has a special kind of power under the UN Charter, which is the main legal document that explains how the UN works. This means that when the Security Council makes a decision, it is binding. In other words, all UN member countries are legally required to follow it. The UN Security Council was created in 1945, at the same time as the United Nations itself. World leaders had just experienced the horrors of World War II, and they wanted to design a system that could prevent another global conflict. At a meeting in San Francisco, representatives from 50 countries agreed on the UN Charter, the set of rules for how the organisation would work. One of the main ideas was collective security. Collective security is the belief that all countries should work together to stop aggression and protect peace. The world would be more secure if countries had a place to meet, discuss, and negotiate with each other in the presence of other countries. And then, if all other countries agreed to provide security for each other, the world would be safer. The structure of the Security Council reflected the political reality of 1945. The most powerful countries from the winning side of World War II, China, which at the time was the Republic of China, which then moved to Taiwan after the Chinese Civil War and was eventually replaced by the People's Republic of China at the UN. France, the Soviet Union, which is now represented by Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, were given permanent seats and special powers. The other seats would be filled by countries chosen for shorter terms, allowing for more nations to participate in decisions about peace and security. From its first meeting in January 1946, the Security Council has been at the centre of some of the world's biggest political debates, crises, and peace efforts. The UN Security Council has 15 members in total. These are divided into two groups: permanent members and temporary members. The 5 permanent members, often called the P5, are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. These countries have been permanent members since the Security Council was created in 1945. They have a special power that no one else has. It's called veto. This means that if just one permanent member votes no on a major decision, the whole resolution is blocked, even if every other country agrees. This gives the P5 a huge influence over the Council's actions, and it can make it hard to come to an agreement on difficult situations. The other 10 members are temporary members. They are chosen by the UN General Assembly, a meeting of all UN countries, for 2-year terms. Temporary members do not have veto power, but they can still vote, join discussions, and help shape the Council's decisions. Seats for temporary members are shared between different regions of the world so that every part of the globe has a chance to be represented. Right now, the 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council are Algeria, Denmark, Greece, Guyana, Pakistan, Panama, South Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Somalia. The main goal of the UN Security Council is simple: keep the world safe and peaceful. But in practice, this can be a very, very difficult job. One of the goals is to prevent armed conflict. The Council tries to solve problems before they turn into wars. But this is much easier said than done, and often wars start before the Security Council can do anything. If fighting breaks out, the UN Security Council can respond to the crisis. Some of the things the Council can do is organise peace talks, send peacekeepers, or even approve military action. Once a conflict is over, the Security Council has the goal of supporting peace after each conflict. The Council is supposed to help rebuild countries after war by supporting new governments, restoring order, and protecting civilians. Of course, all of these goals and tasks are incredibly difficult challenges. Often they're impossible, and the Security Council can take many different actions to try and achieve these goals. It might pass a resolution that demands countries stop fighting. It could impose sanctions that make it harder for aggressive governments to get money or weapons. Or maybe it could send UN peacekeeping forces to protect people in dangerous situations. For example, after Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the Security Council passed a strong resolution demanding withdrawal. It also authorized a coalition of countries to use military force to remove Iraqi forces. The Council also authorized military action to protect civilians during the civil war in Libya. This decision was at first seen as a success for international intervention, because it's very, very rare that the USA, China, and Russia agree on the same thing. But later, this decision actually turned out to be incredibly controversial. There are so many criticisms surrounding the Security Council. It's a very flawed institution, and, I guess in my opinion, slightly outdated and unfair. One major criticism is the veto power. This rule means that if even one permanent member votes no on a major decision, the action cannot go ahead. Countries have used the veto to protect their own interests, even in situations where urgent action was needed. This can make the Council slow and ineffective during crises, especially if the crisis involves one of the countries on the Security Council. If the UK, France, Russia, China, or the US are involved in a conflict, they're likely going to use their veto to make sure that they protect themselves. For example, after the Security Council approved actions in Libya, Russia and China felt that they had been misled by the US. In 2011, the Libyan civil war erupted. Instead of vetoing any military intervention, Russia and China decided to not vote. This meant that the rest of the members of the Security Council voted in favour of military intervention. However, Russia and China felt that the US response in Libya, which involved bombing raids and direct intervention, was far too aggressive. It was not what they expected. In response, both Russia and China have repeatedly vetoed any military interventions that have come before the Security Council since. For example, multiple resolutions addressing the civil war in Syria have been blocked by vetoes from Russia and China. They were misled over Libya, and they do not want that to happen again. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Security Council, of course, tried to respond, but Russia is a permanent member. Russia's veto prevented any major UN resolutions against its actions. Another criticism is representation. The 5 permanent members were chosen in 1945 after World War II. At that time, they were among the most powerful countries. And still, those 5 countries are powerful, especially the US and China. But the world has changed. Powers like India, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Germany, they play a much bigger role today in the global economy and international politics. But they do not have permanent seats on the Security Council. Many people say the Council no longer reflects modern global politics. The Council is also sometimes accused of double standards. Critics say it acts strongly in some situations, but ignores others, depending on the political interests of permanent members. For example, often the permanent members have interests in the Middle East, which is why the Security Council has in the past been very strong in areas like Iraq, but they often ignore parts of the world where they don't have interests in. For example, in parts of Asia or Africa where the Security Council doesn't have as much interest. For many years, world leaders and experts have been talking about how to reform the UN Security Council. Most people agree that the way it works now has problems, but there is no agreement on how to fix them, and, to be honest, no prospect of them ever being changed. One common idea is to add more permanent members. We could add countries like India, Brazil, Germany, Japan, or perhaps representatives from Africa. This could make the Council more representative of today's world. Even more radical would be to remove permanent members entirely, which is unlikely because the US, Russia, China, UK and France like their power. Another proposal is to limit the veto power, especially in situations involving genocide or serious human rights violations. Supporters say this would stop permanent members from blocking urgent action. So I guess when it's just a military conflict or some disagreement, perhaps the veto power could still be used, but when it is a human rights violation, maybe we should limit that veto power. Again, this is unlikely to be changed because the countries do not want their powers to be limited. Some suggest changing the way temporary seats are shared between regions so that more voices are heard in discussions. There's over 190 members of the UN, but I think only about 50 or 60 have ever been on the Security Council. However, reform is extremely difficult. To change the rules, all 5 permanent members must agree, and they are often reluctant to give up any of their power. In fact, I can't see any situation where those countries will give up their power. So for now, the Security Council will likely continue to work much as it does today. Whether it can adapt to the upcoming challenges of the 21st century is still an open question. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the Security Council, I won't say it was working cooperatively, but the Soviet Union had collapsed, China was internationalizing, becoming more open to the global economy, and it seemed like the US, Russia, China were beginning to work together a little bit more. They weren't vetoing each other all the time. But now things seem a lot less peaceful. So I'm a lot less optimistic that the Security Council will be able to work well going forward. So here is today's final thought. The UN Security Council is one of the most powerful parts of the UN. It was created after World War II to protect peace, solve conflicts, and uphold international law. But its structure, especially the power of permanent members, often leads to debate and disagreement. Some see it as a vital tool for international cooperation, others believe it is outdated and needs urgent reform. But what do you think? Can the Security Council change to meet the needs of today's world? Or will it remain a symbol of the past? How should the world prevent international conflicts? How should the world protect international peace? Can you think of a different solution than a Security Council? My opinion on the Security Council is that while I think in principle it's a great idea, I like the idea of collective security, the idea of countries working together to protect each other, I think old rivalries and power dynamics mean that it's going to always be flawed. The fact that the countries disagree with each other on issues of politics, issues of ideology, issues of the economy, issues of geography, they disagree with each other on everything. I think this is always going to limit the organisation. But I want to know your opinion. Leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify. If you like listening to Thinking in English, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. I run conversation clubs. These are opportunities to practice speaking with other members. They last 1 hour. You work in a small group of 3 or 4 people. Either I or a professional English tutor will be at the conversation club, joining groups, joining in conversations. You can practice talking. And the best part is that it only costs £11.50 a month. You can join 6 conversation clubs a week on a normal week, plus lots of other benefits. So if you're interested in Patreon, please consider supporting the show. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you next time. Goodbye.